AITAH for snapping at my wife and calling her crazy because she wants me to take a paternity test for my nephew? It's been 10 years of marriage to my wife. 14 years together in total. A decade is a long time to grow into a life with someone. To establish a rhythm, and settle into a pattern of understanding each other. Even on the difficult days. We've had our moments, good and bad, but always managed to work through things together. Finding our way back to the shared values and trust that brought us together in the first place. And part of that trust was built on a mutual respect for our choice to be child-free. That's a personal decision and one we never wavered on. Both of us clear from the start about the life we wanted to lead, focused on careers, travel, and simply enjoying the bond we'd worked hard to create. And while we might not have had kids of our own, I do have my nephew. He's 13 now and growing faster than I can keep up. Since he was young, he's been a fixture in my life. Almost like the son I never had. It was never a plan or intention to step into a fatherly role with him. But I'm grateful for it. With his dad long gone, he needed someone, and his mother, my sister, has done all she can. But I've always known she appreciated having me there to help fill the gaps. I've always wanted to be there for him, to provide some steadiness in his life. It's brought me joy to see him grow, even with the challenges he's faced. Like his diagnosis with autism. Being there for him has added purpose to my life. But it's never been something I thought would test my marriage. The resemblance between us? Yeah, people talk about it all the time. We do share similar facial features. And a few people in my family have even said how uncanny it is to see my nephew and I standing side by side. How he's my mini-me. It was always meant as a compliment. A way of highlighting the close bond we share. A visual echo of how important he is to me. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a little proud hearing it. But recently, that resemblance, and my relationship with my nephew as a whole, seems to have struck a nerve with my wife. I'd brushed it off at first, thinking it was just an odd moment of insecurity. But over time, those moments have started to stack up, taking on a weight I can't ignore. And now, it feels like something so much deeper is brewing beneath the surface. At first, I couldn't understand where my wife's concerns were coming from. It seemed harmless enough, a comment here, a question there. Maybe I'd notice her eye lingering on my nephew a little too long. Or she'd make a casual remark about how close he and I were. Or how he looked so much like me. I assumed it was curiosity. Maybe even a touch of jealousy over the time I spent with him. After all, we'd chosen not to have kids. And yet, here I was, pouring so much energy and affection into my nephew. But I honestly thought she understood why I was there for him. Still, there were these odd moments. I remember once, after a family gathering where everyone joked about our resemblance, she turned to me in the car and asked, "Don't you think it's a little strange?" At the time, I laughed it off, brushing it away with some comment about how genetics can be funny that way. I didn't think it would turn into anything serious. But then it kept coming up. In small but sharp ways. She'd say things like, "I just don't understand why he has to look so much like you." As though I could somehow control it. Or she'd question why I took such an active role in his life. As if I needed a reason beyond being his uncle. And, to make matters worse, my sister, with her usual dry humor, only seemed to fan the flames without meaning to. She'd joke about how her son was a better version of me, or throw in some teasing remark about how lucky he was to inherit the family looks gene. At first, I thought my wife just found the jokes annoying or maybe even rude. But eventually, I realized they were feeding into something darker. It was unsettling to watch the playfulness between my sister and me turn into a source of resentment. One night, my wife outright asked why my nephew had autism, as though it could be some hidden reflection of something else. That question sat with me like a stone. Heavy and confusing. She'd never mentioned anything remotely like this before. I couldn't fathom why she would question something so personal, so deeply part of who my nephew was. In that way, it didn't sit right. It felt like she was looking for some crack. Something that would explain her growing insecurity. And it stung, because there was nothing to explain. It was all in her head. And it hurt me to know that she couldn't just let it go. Even so, I tried to understand. I asked her what was bothering her. Why she felt uncomfortable. She shrugged it off each time, brushing my questions away, but there was always this tension, this unspoken thing hovering between us. I told myself it would pass, that she was going through a phase, or maybe the jokes had simply struck a nerve. But deep down, I knew there was something more she wasn't saying. I'd hoped talking to my sister would help. That maybe if she toned down the jokes, my wife could let go of whatever had gotten under her skin. But no matter what I did, the doubts persisted. They took on a life of their own, filling the spaces between us with this strange and unwelcome tension. After all those months of small remarks, strange glances, and tense silences, I convinced myself that the issue was dying down. I tried to keep things normal, hoping that the awkwardness would just fade if I didn't give it any attention. But the doubts lingered, stretching out between us like an invisible line of distrust. It was affecting how we lived together, like a crack in the foundation that only grew deeper with each passing day. Then last night, everything finally came to a head. I'd come home from work exhausted, hoping for a quiet evening, but I could sense something different in the air as soon as I stepped inside. My wife was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly, eyes downcast, like she was bracing herself. I asked her if everything was okay, feeling a chill in the back of my mind because I already knew something was wrong. She looked up, and her face was a strange mix of determination and hesitation. Then, in a voice that was almost too soft, she asked me to take a paternity test. At first, I couldn't even process what she was saying. It felt like the room went silent. My heart beat loud in my ears. A paternity test, for my nephew? For my sister's child? The request was so outrageous, so completely out of left field that I laughed, thinking she must be joking. But she didn't laugh. She was dead serious. In that moment, I could feel every ounce of frustration, disbelief, and anger welling up in me. I'd brushed off her insecurities for months, tried to understand, tried to be patient, all while feeling that my relationship with my nephew, the child I'd watched grow, whom I loved deeply, was somehow under siege by the very person I shared my life with. And now, to see the person I loved the most questioning the very nature of my bond with him, to imply something that had never once crossed my mind, that was the final straw. I snapped. I let out every single thing I'd held back for the sake of keeping the peace. Every frustration that had built up since her odd comment started. I told her that her insecurities were spinning out of control, that this obsession was driving us apart. I felt the words coming out sharper than I meant. But in that moment, I couldn't hold back. I was furious. And honestly, I felt betrayed. She was supposed to trust me. And yet, here she was, asking me to prove something that should never have been questioned. Then, before I could stop myself, I said something I instantly regretted. I told her that marrying her might have been a mistake if this was the kind of insecurity I'd had to deal with forever. As soon as the words left my mouth, I knew they'd hit a nerve. Her face crumbled, and I saw a pain in her eyes that made my heart ache. I didn't mean it, not in the way it came out. Anyway, I loved her deeply, but I couldn't take back what I'd said. She sat there, stunned, tears gathering in her eyes. I wanted to reach out, to take it all back, but it was too late. She started to cry quietly, and I felt a wave of regret, knowing I'd hurt her in a way I never wanted to. For a moment, neither of us said anything, just sat in silence, both of us reeling from what had just happened. That night, I barely slept. I kept going over everything in my mind, wondering how we'd let it get to this point. This woman, who was my best friend, my partner, was now someone I didn't recognize. And as much as I wanted to fix things, I wasn't sure where to begin. Because in the end, I knew this wasn't just about my nephew or the paternity test, this was about trust. And I didn't know if we could ever find it again. The day after our argument, the tension in the house was unbearable. We moved around each other in silence, avoiding eye contact, each of us retreating into our own corners like strangers in the same space. I could see the hurt in her face, the redness in her eyes from crying, and it twisted something in my chest. But every time I tried to open my mouth to say something, the memory of her request, the demand for a paternity test, flashed in my mind. And I felt that anger bubble up all over again. I went to work, trying to distract myself with deadlines and projects. But I could feel the unease gnawing at me the entire time. My thoughts were a storm of frustration, betrayal, and confusion. How could the woman who knew me best think I could betray her? Betray my sister, in such a way? Had our relationship somehow bred a level of distrust that I had failed to notice until it boiled over? And if that were true, what did it mean for us? When I got home that evening, I found her sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, looking just as lost as I felt. I was drained from a long day. But I knew we couldn't go on like this. Yet, when I tried to bring up the conversation, her response was stiff, defensive. She brushed me off, saying that she didn't want to fight anymore. It was like a wall had been erected between us. And no matter what I tried, I couldn't find a way through it. The days turned into weeks, each passing with more tension and silence, filling the spaces where laughter and comfort used to be. Every meal, every quiet evening spent together felt like a chore. We spoke only when necessary. Our interactions stripped of the warmth we once shared. It was like we were existing in two separate worlds, barely holding onto the last remnants of our marriage, each of us unwilling to bridge the gap that had formed. I kept hoping things would improve, that we'd find a way to talk about this and move on. But with each passing day, my frustration only grew. My wife seemed unwilling to let go of her insecurities, her doubts simmering beneath the surface. And I couldn't forget the accusation she had thrown at me, couldn't shake the anger that had built up over months of her questioning my loyalty and commitment. One evening, I came home to find her sitting with our photo album, flipping through pictures of us together over the years. Seeing her there, a pang of sadness hit me hard, reminding me of all the love and history we shared. Yet, even that sight didn't bring the comfort it once did. It was as though the weight of her doubts had poisoned every memory we had, casting a shadow over everything we'd built together. I wanted to talk, to somehow bridge this chasm, but the words got stuck in my throat. There was too much unspoken anger, too much resentment on both sides. I could tell that she felt it too, that even as she looked through those pictures, the memories were tainted by everything that had happened. And for the first time, I wondered if this rift between us was something we could ever truly overcome. As the days continued, I began avoiding home more often, working late, spending time out with friends just to escape the icy silence that had become our reality. Each time I walked through our front door, I felt more like a visitor than a husband. The connection we once shared felt like a distant memory, buried beneath layers of mistrust and unresolved pain. And the more I stayed away, the more I wondered if this was just the beginning of the end, if the love that once bound us together had been irrevocably fractured. One evening, after another long day of avoiding the conversation we desperately needed to have, I came home to find a letter on the kitchen counter. The handwriting was hers, the way she formed my name in delicate, looping letters, but something about it felt different, more final. Somehow, I hesitated before opening it, my mind racing through every possibility, every worst-case scenario. With a shaky hand, I unfolded the paper and started to read. In the letter, she laid out everything she hadn't been able to say aloud. She apologized for hurting me, for letting her insecurities and doubts overshadow our relationship. She admitted that she had always felt a quiet fear that I'd grow tired of our child-free life, that maybe I'd feel some desire to be a father in ways that she couldn't share with me. She confessed that my bond with my nephew had only intensified that fear, making her feel even more isolated and uncertain. And though she knew it was irrational, she explained that she couldn't shake the sense that she might never fully understand or connect with that part of me. Reading her words, I felt a pang of guilt, realizing how much I hadn't considered the weight of her emotions. Maybe I'd missed the subtle hints of her worry, the times when she would watch me with my nephew and look away a bit too quickly. Perhaps I'd been so wrapped up in my own pride over being a good uncle that I'd failed to see how my closeness with him could leave her feeling like an outsider. I'd never even thought about how deeply those fears might run or how long she'd been carrying them. The letter continued, and she acknowledged the mistake of suggesting the paternity test, a move born out of a desperation to soothe her own fears rather than a genuine doubt in me. She'd seen how ridiculous it was, even as she wrote, but felt helpless against her insecurities. The letter ended with her expressing a deep regret, saying she wished she could turn back time, wished she hadn't let her anxieties spiral to the point of pushing me away. She signed it with love but didn't ask for forgiveness or make any promises, just left it open. An apology laid bare on the page. I folded the letter and sat with it in my hands, feeling the weight of her words settle over me. I was angry, furious, even that her doubts had driven such a wedge between us. But I also felt the overwhelming sadness that came with understanding. I'd been so busy feeling betrayed and indignant that I hadn't even thought to look at things from her perspective. She'd always supported my relationship with my nephew, She'd never once indicated how much it might hurt her to see me in a role that wasn't a part of our shared life. That night, I lay awake, replaying everything that had happened over the last few weeks. Every moment where things had gone wrong. I thought about her quiet insecurities. The moments where she seemed hesitant or unsure but never said why. I thought about my anger. The words I'd thrown at her in frustration. The cold shoulder I'd given her as if she were a stranger. I'd let my pride and resentment drive a wedge between us without once stopping to think about how she might be feeling. In the morning, I knew I had a choice to make. I could keep holding onto my anger. Let it build until it became an immovable barrier between us. Or I could try to understand, really understand, where her fears came from, and see if there was a way to rebuild the trust we'd both lost. It wouldn't be easy, and I didn't know if we could ever go back to the way things were before. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope, a possibility that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way forward together. The next day, after rereading her letter a dozen times and letting her words soak in, I finally sat down with her at the kitchen table. I hadn't planned what I was going to say. Didn't have any kind of script in my head. All I knew was that the silent distance between us had to end. One way or another. She looked up as I sat across from her, eyes wide and wary, as though bracing for another argument. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her fingers twisting the fabric of her shirt, a small sign of the tension she was trying to hold in. I started slowly, stumbling through an apology for snapping at her, for saying things I didn't mean, for calling her crazy, and as I spoke, her face softened, and I saw the hurt I'd caused etched into her expression. Her vulnerability made my own anger feel small and insignificant, like an ember I could no longer stoke into flames. I know it was wrong, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I should have trusted you. But when everyone kept making comments about how alike you and your nephew are, I started to think maybe there was something to it. She looked down, ashamed, and I realized how deeply her fears had taken root. I felt stupid for feeling that way, so I kept it to myself. And then it just grew and grew, and I couldn't get it out of my head. I nodded, trying to show her that I was really listening, that I wasn't going to judge her for her insecurities. For so long, I had seen her doubts as accusations, as an insult to my character, when all along they'd been the product of her own insecurities. She was terrified of losing me, of being left out of a part of my life that meant so much to me. It was in that moment that I realized our problems went deeper than the question of paternity. This wasn't just about a test or a joke that had gone too far. It was about trust, about feeling seen and valued, about insecurities that we'd both ignored for too long. And maybe, just maybe, it was also about all the things we'd never said to each other. The silent fears and unresolved feelings that had quietly built up over the years. So, I shared some of my own fears. Things I'd never voiced because I hadn't wanted to seem weak or insecure. I told her about my anxieties over being childfree, about how watching my nephew grow up had filled a space in me that I hadn't even known was there. I admitted that I worried sometimes that I wasn't enough for her. That maybe we'd made a mistake by not having children. It wasn't that I wanted a family of my own, our life together was enough for me, but being so close to my nephew had stirred something in me. A feeling I couldn't entirely ignore. She listened, tears glistening in her eyes. And I saw a flicker of understanding, a connection that we hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. She took my hand, and in that touch, I felt the years we'd spent together, the love that had been buried under layers of doubt and resentment. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I was so wrapped up in my own fears that I didn't even think about what you were going through." We sat in silence for a long moment, hands intertwined, both of us absorbing the weight of everything we'd just shared. In that quiet space, something shifted. It wasn't a grand resolution, and it didn't erase the hurt or the mistakes we'd made. But it was a start, a fragile truce that held the promise of healing. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, we both knew that. There were wounds that would take time to mend, insecurities that wouldn't disappear overnight. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that maybe we could rebuild the trust we'd lost. We had both made mistakes, both let our insecurities get the best of us. But in that moment, we chose to move forward together, to face our fears and doubts as a team. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. After our conversation, things between us shifted, and for the better. But healing doesn't happen all at once. Even after our moment of honesty, there was still a lingering fragility to us. The cracks from everything that had happened remained visible and raw. We knew we couldn't plaster over them and pretend we were whole again. Instead, we had to rebuild, one piece at a time, acknowledging the damage we'd done to each other and ourselves. Days went by, and we tried to find a new normal. We both made efforts to communicate better, to open up without letting things fester. I tried to be more present, paying attention to the little things that made her feel secure and loved. Meanwhile, she worked on letting go of the worries that had gripped her, of trusting the strength of what we had. And still, every now and then, I'd see her hesitation, a shadow that crossed her face when my nephew's name came up or when I talked about visiting him. It was subtle, a flinch she probably didn't realize was there. And each time, I felt the tug of anger and hurt. The reminder of that night when she'd asked for the test. But I learned to push it down, to breathe through it, focusing instead on how far we'd come. We both went to counseling, not just as a couple but separately. 2. I needed to understand why her accusation had cut me so deeply and why my instinct had been to lash out, to push her away instead of bringing her closer. She, on the other hand, was working to confront the insecurities that had led her to such a dark place. Therapy wasn't an instant fix, there were still painful truths to uncover and face. But we kept going, determined to untangle the mess we'd created. One day, she came up to me, holding a crumpled piece of paper with notes she'd written in a counseling session. She wanted to read it aloud. She said, because it was easier than speaking from memory. She shared how she had grown up with her own silent fears. A sense of never quite being enough, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Her parents had separated when she was young, and it had left her with a constant undercurrent of doubt, whether love could really last, whether people were really capable of staying faithful and true. Hearing her words, I understood in a way I hadn't before. Her fears had roots that went deeper than anything I'd ever known. In that moment, I saw her vulnerability, her humanness, her struggles that I'd somehow never fully grasped. It didn't excuse what she'd put us through, but it made me realize how much we both brought our own pasts, our own unspoken insecurities, into this marriage. Slowly, the walls between us began to crumble. We found ways to laugh again, to share quiet moments without the weight of unspoken resentments hanging over us. There were still tough days, still moments when we had to remind ourselves of the promises we'd made. But bit by bit, we started to feel like us again. We took short trips together, small weekend getaways where we could just be ourselves, away from the weight of our routine and our past mistakes. As for my nephew, he remained an important part of my life. My wife didn't come along on visits right away. I could tell she needed time to reach a place where she felt at ease with our bond. But she never asked me not to see him, and I appreciated that as a sign of her growing trust. I can't say that things between us went back to exactly how they used to be. The truth is, we weren't the same people we had been before all this happened. But maybe that was okay. We were building something new, something stronger and more resilient. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was ours. And in that quiet, imperfect space, we began to find our way back to each other. Just when things were beginning to settle, life decided to throw us another curveball, as if to test the foundations of our newly rebuilt trust. A family member brought up the idea of a family reunion, an extended weekend where everyone, including all the distant cousins and second cousins we never saw, would be invited. My wife and I hadn't attended one together in years, so it felt like it could be an important step in reconnecting with my family and, in a way, re-establishing our own connection with a broader support system. But as we began to make plans for it, I could tell my wife was struggling. Her enthusiasm about the reunion was forced, and every now and then, the question of my nephew, who would also be there, hung in the air between us. We hadn't spoken openly about him in a while, and I could see that this reunion would be the first time she would confront those lingering doubts in the light of our family and friends. On the drive up, the air felt thick, as if we were both avoiding the obvious tension. My wife was quiet, but I could see her fingers tapping against her knee, her mind racing with whatever fears she hadn't yet put into words. And I felt it too, an uneasy feeling that somehow, despite all the work we'd done, this might bring back some of the pain we were trying to leave behind. When we arrived, I watched her face tighten as she saw my nephew running up to greet us. He was taller, growing into the teenager he was, with a smile that mirrored my own when I was his age. As he came up to give me a hug, I saw my wife watching, her expression unreadable but intent, as if she was absorbing every detail, every resemblance. During the reunion, my wife tried to make small talk with the family, but I could see that her mind was elsewhere, her gaze often lingering on my nephew whenever he was around. Later, when we had a rare moment alone, she admitted she'd been struggling with being there and seeing us together. She confessed, quietly, that even after all our work, a part of her still wondered, still harbored a fear that somehow, in some way, her doubts were real. Hearing her say it out loud, I was gutted, but this time, I understood. Instead of reacting in anger, I held her hand and tried to offer reassurance. I told her how grateful I was for her honesty, that I understood this was hard for her, and that I wasn't giving up on us. There were no perfect words to say, no guarantee that this would erase her doubts. But I knew then that patience was the only thing that could help us weather the scars this had left. As the weekend progressed, I made an effort to stay close, to help her feel connected to me even as she dealt with her own internal battles. And in a small but powerful act of courage, she made an effort too, spending time with my nephew and talking to my family, embracing the reality of my life beyond our relationship. It wasn't easy, I could see the strain on her face at times. But she showed up, and that alone felt like a victory. By the end of the reunion, we both felt exhausted but strangely liberated, as if finally, she'd faced something she'd been hiding from for too long. On the drive home, she reached for my hand, and without a word, we drove in silence, a peaceful silence this time. The ghosts that had haunted us felt more distant, less imposing, as though they'd finally loosened their grip. The weekend hadn't resolved everything, of course. We both still had our battles to fight, and there would be moments, I knew, when her fears might still surface, casting shadows over the progress we'd made. But the experience gave us something else, a renewed sense of resilience, a deeper appreciation for the work we were putting into our marriage. We were no longer just healing, we were learning to live with the scars, accepting them as part of our journey together. And in that acceptance, I felt a renewed faith in our ability to move forward, stronger and more united than before. As the days passed after the family reunion, life resumed a quiet rhythm, and for a while, it felt like we were truly back on track. But a sense of uncertainty hung in the air, an awareness that no matter how hard we tried, some moments of doubt might still linger. For both of us, it was a delicate balance between moving forward and allowing ourselves the time to fully let go of the shadows we carried. It wasn't long before our resolve faced a new test. My nephew's mother, my sister, called with unexpected news. She had accepted a job offer out of state. It meant moving a significant distance away, and she wanted to discuss the possibility of my nephew staying with us on weekends so he could finish his school year with minimal disruption. When I shared this news with my wife, I could see her hesitation, a familiar tension tightening across her face. After a long pause, she nodded and said she understood the request, but I could tell the situation wasn't easy for her. It wasn't just about my nephew, it was about reopening that door to the uncertainties she'd struggled to close. For her, agreeing to my nephew's presence in our home felt like a silent challenge to her trust, her security, and everything we'd fought so hard to rebuild. I gave her space, knowing that she needed time to process the request, but I was quietly anxious about her response. My nephew meant a lot to me, and being able to help him navigate his school year without upheaval felt important. But my marriage was the priority, and I knew this had to be a joint decision. Over the next few days, I noticed her wrestling with the dilemma. She tried to carry on as usual, but every now and then, I would catch her staring off, lost in thought. It was clear that she was struggling, that this request had brought back a flood of memories we'd worked so hard to overcome. I stayed nearby, not pushing her to make a decision but letting her know I was there, ready to listen whenever she was ready. Finally, one evening as we sat together, she turned to me, and I could see the mix of vulnerability and strength in her eyes. She told me she was scared, that having my nephew around regularly might stir up the same anxieties she'd tried so hard to leave behind. But then she surprised me. She said that even with those fears, she wanted to support me, that she understood my bond with my nephew and respected my role in his life. It was the most honest, brave response I could have imagined, and it meant more than words could express. When my nephew arrived that weekend, my wife's commitment to our relationship shone through in every action. She went out of her way to make him feel comfortable, engaging with him in small, meaningful ways, and I could see that she was putting in every effort to embrace him as a part of our family. I knew it wasn't easy for her. The shadows of her doubts might still linger. But she was willing to face them, to challenge her fears in a way that few would. Our weekends with him became a routine, and slowly, my wife seemed to grow more comfortable. The anxious glances she used to give him softened, replaced with a quieter acceptance, and I felt a surge of gratitude and admiration for her. She was choosing to trust, even in the face of lingering uncertainty. And that trust was a testament to her strength and the depth of her commitment to our marriage. In those moments, as we navigated this uncharted territory together, I began to see our relationship through a different lens. It wasn't just about love or compatibility, it was about resilience. About the willingness to face the unknown together and choose to believe in each other. Even when doubt crept in, for the first time in a long while, I felt that we were truly moving forward, not because we had erased the past, but because we had learned to carry it with us without letting it define us. It was a quiet but powerful realization, one that brought a sense of peace and closure I hadn't known I needed. We were a family, imperfect and weathered but strong in our resolve to face whatever came our way. Together, in the days following our decision to host my nephew on weekends, I could feel a shift in our home. Life was quieter, calmer in a way that I hadn't anticipated. My wife and I had confronted something deeply painful, something that would have been easier to ignore or run from. But by facing it, even if we hadn't fully conquered our uncertainties, we had created a new layer of resilience in our relationship. I realized, as I watched her interact with my nephew, that this journey had redefined what our marriage meant. We had survived a storm that could have easily driven us apart. One built on fear and misunderstandings that neither of us asked for but had to endure. Now, we were left standing together, and each day that passed without incident felt like a small triumph. A reminder of how far we had come. For the first time in months, I saw my wife laugh freely. I caught her smiling as she chatted with my nephew, laughing at his jokes and showing him the same kindness and patience she showed our close family members. In those moments, I knew that the bridge we had built between us was real. She was choosing to trust, not just me, but herself. Her ability to weather the unknown, to face the messy parts of life that can't always be resolved or explained. As for me, the love and respect I felt for her had deepened in ways I hadn't expected. I had been furious when she first raised the idea of a paternity test, and I hadn't known if we could move past it. But her willingness to question herself, to work through her fears, and still support my bond with my nephew without reservation, it spoke to her strength. It showed me that beneath her initial doubt was a commitment that ran deep and true. In this new chapter, my nephew's presence became a constant, but not a reminder of past insecurities. Instead, it became a symbol of our perseverance, of a trial we had faced head-on and emerged from stronger. If not untouched, my wife and I didn't discuss the past doubts or insecurities anymore. It was as if we had silently agreed that they no longer held power over us. We had proven that we could endure them, survive them, and grow beyond them. With time, our family settled into this new normal, one that felt more stable, more assured. We found a rhythm that let us all thrive together. On weekends, I saw my wife and nephew establish their own connection, and the laughter, the shared moments of joy, felt like quiet celebrations of the peace we had fought so hard to regain. Looking back, I can see that this journey was less about finding certainty and more about learning to be okay with its absence. We had built a family grounded in resilience, one that could withstand doubt and insecurity and still choose love, even in its most challenging form. This wasn't the life I had imagined when we first got married. But in many ways, it was more meaningful, more precious. Now, when I look at my wife, I no longer see someone who questioned my loyalty or needed constant reassurance. I see a partner who has seen the worst of our fears and still chooses to walk beside me. Who trusts in the strength we've built together. And that trust, hard-won and deeply felt, had become the foundation of our marriage. More enduring than any promise we had made before. In the end, we weren't just surviving anymore. We were living, choosing each day to move forward together, stronger than before.